Good morning. Can you hear me well? Yes. Good morning. My name is Ana Diaz. I'm Project Officer at Alzheimer Europe. I would like to start by welcoming everyone here in the audience, as well as people joining from home online. We are here today for a session on public involvement in dementia research, which is a topic which is at the heart of Alzheimer Europe. And I would like as well to remind the public that this is a hybrid session, which means we have some people joining here in Bucharest, as well as people joining from home. And you can put your comments, your questions using the app in the session P24. We have 5 speakers planned, but unfortunately the second speaker has to cancel her presentation, so we have only 4 speakers. That means that we will have, at the end of the session, a bit more of time for some discussion and questions and answers. And I would like to start introducing our first speaker, Ruth Croney. She has over 23 years of clinical research experience. She has held various roles in clinical operations, trial management, and project leadership positions during her career. Her therapeutic area experience spans neuroscience, oncology, and immunology for global phase 1 to 3 trials. She's currently the clinical program leader for Roche across the Alzheimer's disease franchise, spanning early and late clinical trials. She has worked at Roche since 2005, and she has been awarded the Roche CEO Award for Excellent Innovation in 2010, and again in 2018, the Roche Pharma Development Breakthrough Award in recognition for her fostering learning and creativity for partnering with patients. She has an MSc in parasitology from the London School of Tropical Medicine. She starts her career in Kenya, but she's currently based in the UK. Welcome, Ruth. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm here today to be talking about how we integrated people living with Alzheimer's and their care partners' perspective into AD clinical trial development. And here's my disclosures and the disclosures of the other co-authors. So really, this really did start with a curiosity. We were thinking about a trial in early development, and we recognized that the potential of this trial had a really large burden on participants. So we really wanted to start engaging with the community to understand really what would be the true drivers and their barriers to join such a trial. This, like I say, it was an early trial, so very little clinical benefit could be offered. So we started off reaching out to the caring community, and caring is a grassroots initiative in Roche. It's open to all employees who either are living with a condition or are caring for somebody with a condition. So we initially reached out to the caring network with Alzheimer's, and we gathered some very powerful insights. And fundamentally, one of the things that we clearly had to understand was, first and foremost, people that are wanting to join clinical trials, you have to see them as partners and not as patients. And really what this does, it really creates a whole new concept of how we engage. I mean, looking at the time investment of participants joining our trials and all the barriers, certainly with invasive procedures that the trials can involve. When we talk to individuals, they really express this sense of being overwhelmed when introducing clinical trials to them. And so it could really, we had to really give clear communication and rationale for the trial. People really need to understand the why. And that's very important, specifically when you're wanting to conduct invasive procedures on your trial. So what this did is it really created a list of call for actions for us. And that was actions that we took it back internally through our study team and made adjustments, but also how we then developed our training materials for our sites and how we brought on our clinical sites for our trials. And really, I have to say, there was a really big aha moment within all of this. You know, when we're sitting there looking at a clinical trial and looking at a schedule of assessments, which is, you know, quite burdensome, but really the involvement of the care partners to support that schedule of assessment goes much, much beyond what's on paper. And their time commitment is really huge. You know, there's the preparation before the visit, or the answering questions, trying to relieve any anxiety. Then you've got the actual clinic visit, which can be really exhausting. And then afterwards, getting home, managing all of the fatigue, and then can lead to a very, very restless evening. So really, there has to be a greater awareness of this holistic support that has to be provided to our care partners and the crucial role that they play within supporting our clinical trials. And then if really fundamentally, if we don't address those needs, then it really can impact the participation of our clinical trials. So what started as initial outreach for our early phase trial really has broadened and grown over the past 2 years, and that's been really spearheaded by our patient partnership group. And this is developed into the FAST Council. And the FAST Council is a group of representatives from various global patient organisations and Roche as well. And it's the FAST Council is Finding Alzheimer's Solutions Together. And it's a group that meet about twice a year. And they really are there to understand the barriers that exist with clinical trials. And it's a forum to really co-create together on these shared areas of interest. So, and the findings and what's come out of these dialogues has really been the foundations and fundamental in co-creating our clinical trials guidebook. So the guidebook, ultimately what it is, it's a first-of-a-kind initiative with pharma and the wider community. And what we wanted to do is produce a guide that really gives tangible solutions to the community, a standard approach of how we can approach the community and integrate the voices of people living with Alzheimer's and their care partners into our clinical trials. And although it started initially with early phase, this is now a holistic approach that we're looking at across all of our phases from early to late. And it's really a guidance that recognises the needs of people living with Alzheimer's, their care partners, with an objective to really improve clinical trial outcomes and participants' experiences. So this is a living document. It's an iterative process. What we have today is something that we want to build upon. It contains fit-for-purpose tactics of really from the outset what you should consider when working with the community on setting up your clinical trial. The initial planning, when you're enrolling, but also during the clinical trial, how to keep people engaged and retained on your clinical trial, and then after, when the trial's over. So this guidebook is really impacting us and our cross-functional study development teams and how we are defining our clinical trial strategies. We want to really ensure that the trials that we build are participant-centric, they are inclusive, and that we recognise up front the barriers of recruitment and retention for our study designs. So to alleviate protocol amendments going forward so that we can be swifter and more efficient. It also gives a platform to build a partnership and not constantly going back with the same questions to the community, but just with a different study. This is about building upon previous dialogue and going forward with the community. It also helps us inform with our working with our sites, you know, what sort of support mechanisms need to be in place to bring people into trials, and what the site physically needs to accommodate for and be aware of to support people living with Alzheimer's and their care partners. And by doing this, we want to be able to react quickly in the real time so that we can be proactive in our approach and responding to the needs of the community. So, as I said, this guidebook is a living organic document. It's where it started from and where it's become is something that we want to continue to progress. We're also now looking at exit interviews, so when participants and their caregivers have completed the study, actually holding an interview with them to understand what worked well, what they weren't aware of before they started the study, what they would have liked to have received more of, so that we can improve experiences going forward. What ultimately this project has done is really highlighted the need for early and inclusive collaboration with the community. And from this Congress, and I'm going to raise this up because it should all be in your bags, is the actual copy of the report from the guidebook that has been released in conjunction with the FAST Council. So this is freely available to everybody. We wanted to make it so that everybody can learn from the experiences that we have gained. And that it's got creative license, so you can take it, you can translate it, you can use it however you see fit. So that's something that doing a shameless plug about. It's in your bags. So really, in summary, like I say, this guidebook started really from an early partnership with the community, and that we really want to improve our clinical trial designs and outcomes, and that we're using it today to define our clinical development strategies. And this isn't the end. We really see this as the beginning of this collaboration, that we want to increase the scope, and just hearing some of the discussions and presentations the past couple of days, I think there's so much more that we can bring in to this guidebook, and that's really exciting about where this can go next. And so we can, you know, bring every step of the clinical trial process into our guidebook. And with that, I just want to thank Alzheimer Europe. I want to thank you for your attention, but most importantly, I want to thank everybody that was involved in creating of this guidebook. So thank you very much.
Ruth. As you have been very good with your time, we can have one question. I have a very quick question for you on the app, and is it possible to access online the report, and if so, where?
Yes, so I think it's being made available later this week online. Yes, and thank you very much. It's also on the virtual booth, so you should be able to access it on the virtual booth online.
You will receive a press release of Alzheimer Europe with highlights of the conference, and the link will also be in that press release.
So for those online may not have heard the answer to that, but it will be highlighted on the press release after the conference, and there will be a link to the guidebook as well.
That's excellent. Thank you so much, Ruth.
Thank you.
We have more time at the end for questions and answers for all the speakers, so please keep sending your comments and your questions. And I'd like to welcome now our second speaker, Giovanni Nicoli. He is a speech therapist and a linguist. She is currently a PhD student at Nottingham Trent University with a project on motor challenges in communication disorders and possible implication for augmentative alternative communication and assistive technology interventions. Since 2018, he collaborates with Novilunio, a social promotion association committed to promote the dignity, social inclusion and right of people with dementia and their families. Through Novilunio, he had a chance to participate as a visiting researcher to Remind, a European project with the aim of creating an international and intersectoral network to progress developments in reminding technologies for people with dementia that can be deployed in smart environments. within Novi Lunio. He deals with group and individual projects relating to assistive technology. The floor is yours, Giovanni.
Thank you very much. Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity of speaking to you this morning. Today, I'm going to briefly report the experience of 2 groups of people with dementia carried out in the last 2 years within Novi Lunio Association that had the goal to, as the title suggests, co-design strategies that can facilitate the choice and then the use of everyday technologies. And from now on, when I will refer to technologies, everyday technologies, I will refer to very common pieces of technology like smartphone, smartwatches, tablet, or very common voice assistants, and the application created on this system. So let's start. Where do I have to? Oh, okay, this one. The green one. I'm sorry, I'm colorblinded. And yeah, this is the green one. Okay, thank you very much. Yeah. So the project took off from the awareness, and as we have also had the chance to discuss in these days, of the fact that technologies can have a very positive impact on the life, on the quality of life of people with dementia and of the elderly population in general. In fact, technological instruments can be implemented for safety reasons, both within the domestic environment and either outside for orientating, for example, but also technological instruments can be implemented to promote and enhance the social and communication options of people, but as well they can be used for rehabilitation reasons, as we have seen during the COVID pandemic, and last but not least, also for the leisure and the entertainment of people. Let's think, for example, at video streaming or why not the gaming. So, from the perspective of the elderly population and also of people with dementia, these clear advantages that technology can bring often has to face with some struggles and with some issues in the interaction and in the assessing and the accessibility to the instruments, to the technological instruments. And these struggles, these difficulties, may arise from a lifelong inexpertise or lack of familiarity with dealing with some technological instrument, but also can be acquired and often lead to some sort of difficulties in the very first access to the instrument, for example, when referring to a smartphone in unlocking it, or putting up the volume, turn it down, or navigate in a touch-based system. But in some other cases, these struggles can arise from interacting with a specific application, therefore in coordinating and programming complex sequence of actions that require, of course, some sort of dexterity. But also the environment can play an hampering role in the use of technology. Let's for example, think at those tasks that need to be accomplished in a very limited time window. Like things, for example, at answering a phone call or tempestively answering a text message or having to mute the phone when it rings in a situation it does not have to. And in many cases, these lead to the delegation to others to the use of technology rather than using themselves. And this is, and together, all these struggles lead to a very lack of motivation and discouragement in adopting such technological device. That is something that is also experienced more broadly in the field of assistive technology or augmentative alternative communication, where we assist to a huge frequency of tools abandon. Okay. So, given this imbalance between the advantages of technology and the fatigue encountered by some people in interacting with them, we firstly aim at collaborating with people with dementia in individuating and choosing specific needs that can be answered by technology. And secondly, in designing some strategy, some tools that could help people in interacting and interfacing with this kind of technology. This led to our project that consists on 2 groups of respectively 8 and 10 participants with different level of expertise with technology. The groups meet on a fortnight basis and were held by 2 psychologists with expertise in the field of group for people with dementia, especially in cognitive stimulation group, and by 2 speech therapists with expertise in the field of assistive technology. Caregivers were also invited to participate at some of the meetings. In some cases, it was a plenary session. In some other cases, they were asked to participate in a separate group. Okay, so let's focus, for example, for a moment on the strategy that we use to create the group that are directly promoted from the co-designing strategy. In fact, all the meetings took off from users and participants' perspectives and needs. So the very first meeting was dedicated in knowing what participants were expecting from technology, what were the advantages that they were seeking from technologies, and also what were their doubts and their frightens in dealing and interfacing with technology. Some users, for example, share some interest in having some piece of technology that could help them in orientating when outside. Some other instead looked for something that could help them advise their caregiver when they were in a situation of need, to warn their caregivers when they were in a situation of need. Some other need some technology to share photographs with friends and family. Some other express the need of technology to remind them appointments or dates. And once determined and share these needs and these wishes, and put them in a chronological order of approaching them, we presented the participant with some very common pieces of technologies. In Italy, WhatsApp is a very common application for text messages. I don't know if the rest of the Europe is the same, but also Google Maps, YouTube, and very, very common and easy to access and to use application. So we presented this kind of technology and we test with the participant so that they could provide us with some feedback on how they feel about using these technologies and what were their difficulties in interacting with them, and also provided us of some suggestion of what could aid them, what could help them in navigating through this maremanum of application. Thus, we started creating some materials that could help them in accessing the technology. At first, the very first difficulties that arose were in the use of the smartphone, in the very access of the smartphone. Participants showed some difficulties in dealing with the touch system, in unlocking the instrument, in having to navigate and orientate on a humongous number of applications or dealing with very, very small character. So that some very simple and easy simplification methods were put in place. For example, we expanded the time after which the telephone goes in the sleepy mode, in the standby mode, therefore allowing them to not be in every 30 seconds having to unlock it and then switch on to the other task. Or where it was possible, we implemented the easy mode so that it enlarged the character size and reduced the number of icons. And then we also put in place, for those applications that require a more sophisticated number of actions to be accomplished, we created we can see that, yeah, here, oh, sorry. this very simple visual guide that illustrates step by step what were the actions required for accomplish a task, like could be sending a message or make a video call or set some direction into Google Maps. And this material was tested by participants, and they provide us with some suggestion on how to improve the readability of them. So these are the fruit of their work and the interaction with us. And together with this output, the visual step-by-step guide, we also created with one group a very simple handbook, which is called, this one, not this one, okay. What is this one? Tecnologia Memoria Vita, which is a very simple handbook that illustrates what possible technological, both low-tech and high-tech options are available for people with dementia, and also provide some tips on how to ease and facilitate the use of technology. And I will conclude very shortly by illustrating some aspects aside from the output of our project that mostly refer to the groups that were created. First of all, we saw that users participate with high motivation to our groups, and it is possible that the high practical and tangible downfall of technological class, because many may feel the need to experience or learn some expertise in the use of technology, this could better intercept the interest of people, especially the elderly population, and also, in some case, win the reticence of some people of joining a group of peers. The caregivers' involvement was another key aspect of our project, as at first they acknowledged what was created during our groups, and secondly, because they could implement in the daily life what was learned in order to follow up the training. And finally, the group dynamic was another aspect that should be highlighted of our experience, since the group was the chance for people to share their opinions, their experience, to acknowledge others, provide and give suggestions on a peer-to-peer basis. And in both cases, in both our two groups, this group's dynamic led to some spin-offs. For example, is set to start this November an advanced class of technology where we are going to provide a deeper training on some technologies, or maybe we are going to present some other. And the same group is expected to start with a Living Well with Dementia group later on next year, while another group, the first one actually, continues as an advocacy group that is called Orsa Maggiore, that meet regularly and foster activity that have the goal, to share awareness and promote inclusivity of people with dementia. And finally, it is important that group dynamic was also the chance to meet singularly persons that maybe could have been difficult to meet otherwise, and therefore it was possible in some case to provide some sort of tailored care and very individual and specific program of care for that people that is continuing. Thank you very much for the attention. I want to also thank Christian, Eloise, and all the group of Novelunio Association.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Giovanni. That's great. Our next speaker is Louise Hopper. Louise is an assistant professor in the School of Psychology. Sorry, I think I didn't have my microphone. I'm going to restart the online. Apologies. Our next speaker is Louise Hopper. Louise is an assistant professor in the School of Psychology in Dublin City University. She's the chair of the PhD in Psychology and Mathematics and the chair of the School of Psychology Ethics Committee. Louise's research includes psychosocial approaches to support health aging and to support the care of people living with dementia, assistive technologies, ethical decision-making, and health service use. Thank you, Louise. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Anna, and good morning, everybody. So what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is some of the participatory approaches that we used in an EU Erasmus Plus funded project that we called Intense. And I'm presenting these methods and these findings not only on behalf of my own group, but also my colleagues and partners in the Intense consortium. And just to tell you a little bit about the Intense project to begin with. So the idea behind Intense was to develop scenarios, training scenarios for health and social care professionals to simulate the experience of what it might be like to have some of the symptoms of dementia. So that's not to say it's, this is exactly what a person with dementia would be experiencing, but it would give some idea of maybe some of the slightly harder to understand symptoms. And the rationale for doing this was, I suppose if you think about the idea of kind of self-experience or stepping into someone else's shoes and being able to see what it's like from their perspective and being able to tap into that empathy as part of the caregiving process is very important. What we wanted to do is we wanted to combine the evidence base that was out there for self-experience, simulation, training of health and social care professionals with tools that were already available that would enable us to do this work. So we weren't developing something new as such. We wanted to develop a framework to build a lot of what was already out there together in a way that was usable for people. And then training materials that would flow from this combination of scenarios and tools. And when we talked about self-experience, I mean, we mean all of these things. We mean learning by doing, so actively being involved in a scenario during a training course. Effective learning, so learning that is triggered by not only the experience, but the emotions that go with the experience. And we're looking at things also like stepping into someone's shoes, being there in a way in the life that person is leading. So we carried out an initial literature review that looked at best practice approaches to training in this field. And then we looked at, as I mentioned, the tools that were already there. And we categorized the first range of tools as we called no-tech. And this was really anything that could be done without any need for the use of technology. So it could be done in any setting without necessarily needing access to technology. And you'll be familiar with a lot of these things. So film interventions or video-based interventions, role plays. Theatre interventions go a little bit further than a role play where you're actually, if you like, putting together a performance that demonstrates a scenario for a particular individual. Going completely to the other end of the spectrum, then we had our high-tech solutions. So there are virtual reality apps out there like a walk through dementia, for example, that many of you would be familiar with. There are an increasing number of virtual reality environments becoming available, and including sort of digital 3D environments so that it feels like you're in that setting. So in that last picture there, it's almost like I'm lifting the kettle. So it's very much a first-person feeling or sense. But there are also a lot of interactive tools out there, and they can be as simple as simulation glasses that simulate different types of visual impairments. And that could be anything from, let's say, cataracts, but it could also be very simply just kind of hazy perception. And where possible, we've included hacks that you can use for some of these. So, for example, a pair of glasses with a very light smear of Vaseline or gel on the glasses works just as well. And there are simulation gloves that can simulate different types of motor problems. And then headphones are very good, as long as they are not newfangled noise-cancelling headphones, because what we want to do here is we want to bring noise in, so almost simulating a busy environment, if you like. So the methodology that we adopted was very much one of participatory co-design. So our sort of co-design partners were people with dementia, they're family caregivers, they were health and social care professionals, they were professional trainers, and particularly nurse educators were very keen to be involved. And then we also had representation from e-health and policy and implementation science fields as well. We had planned 4 semi-structured 2.5-hour in-person, really participatory workshops, and then, as we've heard from many people, COVID happened. So we had to slightly change what we were doing. And I'll talk a little bit more in a second about how we did that. So we ended up obviously having to move online. We audio recorded all of the online discussions so that we could go back and pick up maybe on something that had been discussed but didn't make it into a scenario at the end of the day. And then we used online collaborative tools to storyboard different scenarios. So just looking quickly at the number of participants that we had. In total, we had 29 health and social care professionals, we had 10 family caregivers, we had 6 people with dementia, and we had 1 industry professional. This was somebody with an expertise in e-health in particular. And the only inclusion criteria that we had for people with dementia was that they had some PPI experience and some experience using Zoom. And we would have preferred not to have that criteria, but because of COVID, that became something that we had to introduce. And informal caregivers or family caregivers could participate as long as they had experience of caring with someone who had a sort of a mild or an advanced dementia. So our beautiful original plan of our lovely co-design sessions with, there was about an hour, then a break for lunch, and then another hour in the afternoon. We obviously had to change this. So I've called our revised plan C, but to be honest, there was a whole lot of plan Bs in between our original and where we ended up, and we went sort of completely different and then came back to actually saying, well, we can actually do this online. We can do this kind of participatory approach. We had to elongate the timeline a bit. We had to give more time in between the different sessions. And what we did was we decided, well, there was a certain amount of material that people could go through beforehand. So we produced in paper format and in visual, video and audio format, sort of self-guides to the information that people could go through before the session. So for example, in the very first session, we sent out examples of the different tools. We sent out videos of people using the tools, also a sort of a presentation with a voiceover that people could follow along. And then in the first interactive workshop, and we kept these very strictly to an hour online, what we did was we said we would take the knowledge of these different tools. So we had a really quick recap at the beginning. And then we spent the time using sort of Google Jamboard for the most part, because it was by far the simplest collaboration tool to use. Just coming up with ideas of different scenarios, day-to-day scenarios that people with dementia felt it was difficult to kind of get across how they were feeling or what was making a particular scenario difficult. And our health and social care professionals and our family carers also gave their perspectives of where they thought the difficulties arose from. And it was a sort of an iterative approach in the sense that we then took that information away, designed some scenarios, out went the next self-guided pack for review where they could look at what we had done, and then everybody came to the next session and we talked about what sort of platform do we want to make this information available. And then we had a prototype of the platform, and the third session looked at sustainability and funding. So at the end of this project, how do we ensure this has a life? Because that can often be problematic. And as I mentioned, we audio recorded everything that we did as well, so that we could look not only at the scenarios that were developed, but also the conversation that happened in these sessions. And we conducted thematic analysis of all of the data that we had available, and we found these 4 themes. So the first theme was about representations of dementia. So it was both a recognition that we needed to cover different types of experiences that people with different types of dementia had. That was very important. Particularly giving an understanding of the emotional side of dementia, but not being overly negative as we did that. That came through as very important. loud and clear was the idea that the scenarios need to be about daily challenges. It's not about the things that people do, once a year or, once in a blue moon. It's about the ordinary everyday. Meal times, overstimulation, disorientation, navigating from one place to another, communication and personal care. The third theme was about applying a person-centred approach. So this was the importance of understanding that there is a person on the other side of the interaction. And as in, I would say, every piece of research I have carried out in the field, we have ended up talking about the process of getting a diagnosis. And that came up again. And actually one of the healthcare professionals made a comment that I thought was insightful. It was, if we actually had some way of understanding what it might be like for that person receiving the diagnosis, we might actually change the way we do it. And I found that slightly strange because I thought it was quite easy to put yourself in the shoes of getting any kind of diagnosis, or so I thought. But a scenario around the build-up, the anxiety, the diagnosis, going home, talking about it afterwards, something that kind of covered the full suite. And the last theme was about implementing self-experience training. So what would work and what wouldn't work actually in practice. So we took the evidence that we had from the literature review, these themes and the various tools that were available, and using that participatory approach developed a whole range of different scenarios. And I'll show you now just what, and I don't expect you to be able to read the next slide, but I'll show you what a typical scenario looks like. So we start off basically with a very brief description of what the scenario is about, the aims, the learning objectives, and when to use this scenario. And then we'll tell you a bit about the equipment that you need, some hacks that you can use, how to download the information and instructions for whoever's facilitating the training. And then you have the actual activity instructions that go out to the participants or to the trainees, and then some suggestions for group discussion and follow-up, because reflection and time for reflection was very important. And all of this information we've put together on an open access platform, our Intense platform, and this is the link to it here. And when you're looking at the information on this platform, you can kind of query or search the information by symptom. So I'm interested in something that speaks about perception or about hearing or about communication. You can look by tool, so I'm really interested in doing something with VR, or I'd like to find out more about theatre interventions. Or you can go straight to a resources section of the website or the platform, and there you can download individually any scenario or the whole sort of set of scenarios as a pack, and there are facilitation guidelines there, lesson plans, and other things that will be useful to trainers. So just to conclude, I was thinking how to conclude, I suppose, the presentation, and I was thinking about, well, what did we get from including our co-design partners that we might not have got if we hadn't done that. And I'm an academic, and I feel like I know something about training or teaching people. But certainly what came across to me, first of all, was that the everyday nature of what it was people who, that what they needed. So that it was something that being able to hear exactly what the issues were, we were able to direct exactly what the scenarios were in response. I think we have a richer and a more extensive set of scenarios than we might have had otherwise. And as there were 4 different countries involved, they're also culturally appropriate in a number of different settings, realistic and achievable. So thank you very much for your attention. So again, this is the link to the toolkit, and I've also given you the link there to the project itself. And if you have any questions at any stage, I'm more than happy for you to drop me an email. Thanks very much.
For an excellent presentation. And our final speaker is sorry, I know.
It's there, is it?
There it is. I know your name, but I was looking for your surname. Sorry. Ashley Flynn. Sorry about that. Ashley.
Don't worry.
is a final year PhD student in the University of Galway in Ireland. She has clinical experience working in role emerging areas of occupational therapy, including a memory technology resource from room service, prescribing technology for people with memory difficulties. Ashlyn's research is focused on the design of a virtual reality social connecting space for other adults living with dementia. Ashlyn is passionate about the meaningful participation of people with dementia in research by using truthfully participatory method. She's dedicated to person-centered and holistic research practice which influence occupational participation and engagement.
Great,
Ashlyn,
thank
the floor
you.
is yours.
Thank you, Anna, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. As Anna mentioned, my name is Aisling Flynn, and I am a final year PhD student in the University of Galway, Ireland. Apologies, it only changed last month. And I'm supervised by Professor Dipna Casey, and I'll be presenting on participatory dementia research and some of my reflections as a doctoral research student and also an early career researcher. So just a little background about my own research. So the aim of my study is to inform the design of a virtual reality social connecting space for older adults living with dementia. So what is virtual reality? I'm sure some of you are aware, but for those who are not, virtual reality, or VR for short, makes you feel like you're in another world or another place. And it does this by using equipment such as a head-mounted display, as you can see on the screen, and controllers. And these controllers then allow you to interact and manipulate this virtual environment. So you can pick things up, you can move things, and you can actually move yourself through the use of these controllers. And my own research project then very much uses participatory research, and in particular participatory action research, to meaningfully involve people living with dementia and also their caregivers in the design of this technology. So just to look at kind of a brief overview of participatory design. So it specifically involves the end user in the design process in the hope that you will lead to a needs-based and easy-to-operate technical solution. And it does this in order to have kind of equal power sharing between the end user and also the designer or the researcher, and where you meet on equal footing. And why do we choose this type of approach? Well, often in technology design, people living with dementia and their caregivers are not involved in the start of the design process, which in turn leads to technology that's not suitable to their needs and also then not adopted into their everyday lives. And this in turn increases digital inequality and also widens this digital divide that we've also heard so much about this week. And I suppose in dementia research, but also in human-computer interaction, we've seen a huge shift from designing for people living with dementia to really designing with them in kind of the core of these projects as well. But we're still looking at ways that we can meaningfully involve them in the technology design process in a way that's not tokenistic or just a tick box exercise. So what did we do for our project? So we initially started out with a core kind of PPI group, and this was made up of 2 people living with dementia, and they were involved in kind of the initial startup of the project, you know, reviewing ethics applications, piloting interview schedules, and actually giving their expertise on how we could sensitively introduce virtual reality to other people living with dementia and their caregivers. And this gave rise to the idea that maybe we should look at this at maybe a larger scale as opposed to having two people involved. And this led then to the recruitment of a larger participatory action research group, which consisted of 9 people living with dementia over the age of 60 living in the community and their caregivers. And actually, just out of habit, I probably will use the term support person from now on because families actually preferred that term. And it just so happened that each of their nominated support persons were actually family members. So I'll use the term support person and family interchangeably throughout the rest of the presentation. And these families really collaborated with me over the past year to co-design this virtual reality application. And we've really used a lot of different participatory methods and methods of data collection. So we've done semi-structured interviews. We've also looked at participatory design workshops, which were done online. We've had a lot of informal meetings, and we also use quite a lot of kind of email correspondence and feedback with family members. And this whole research process has given me thought and food for thought, and has, I suppose, given a lot of cause for reflection for me as a researcher as well. So I'll go through 4 different reflections for me as a PhD student and also an ECR. So the first reflection is recruitment difficulties, and I think throughout this week I've heard it said quite a lot that recruitment in dementia research can be quite challenging, and in particular as a PhD student you're quite uncertain as to where to go and where to really find participants for research, but also for participatory research it can be quite hard because you do rely on a lot more involvement than traditional research processes. And also coupled with the fact that my project started in the middle of COVID-19, so recruitment was quite difficult. Traditional means of online recruitment through day centres and memory cafes, obviously they were shut during COVID-19, so you very much relied on online means and social media to recruit. And again, this posed challenges in having a diverse sample, and we've heard all week as well about the importance of intersectionality, and this definitely is something that it will be a limitation of my own study and something that we need to strive for when we are recruiting, particularly in Ireland. And I see Kira and Laura down there for the ASI, and I do have to thank them because as an ESR and also a PhD student, research registrars and research databases such as the Team Up for Dementia Research really helped me in order to know where to go and what's the first port of call to actually recruit people living with dementia and their support persons who have a genuine interest in research and becoming involved. So I've left the QR code, but I know Kira is presenting later today around this area as well. The second reflection then was orientating to virtual reality, and I know some of the speakers have touched on the fact that this is quite a novel technology and not a lot of people are familiar with using it, and the same goes for the families that were involved in this study. So if we look at their experience of using virtual reality, these are pooled figures for people living with dementia and their support persons. So 7 had actually tried virtual reality themselves, 6 had no experience of using it, and then 5 had actually seen it used, so maybe on television or their grandchildren, but none had actually used it personally. And I think it's important to note there that the 7 participants who mentioned that they had used it before, this was some time ago, they didn't actually own a headset, and they had used quite a basic headset. So basically you just put it on and observed the environment. So it wasn't a fully interactive kind of state-of-the-art system. And also a lot of those figures, the 7, were reflective of the support person using it and not the person living with dementia. This gave rise then to a couple of questions for us as researchers in how can we actually meaningfully allow them to participate in the design of virtual reality if they haven't actually used it before. So I'm just going to pose this question to yourselves. You can self-reflect on it. You don't have to answer it, but I suppose just have you experienced fully immersive virtual reality before? And if you have, do you feel that using it has actually given you the confidence or the ability to inform the design of that technology? And for me, very much, I would say I had used it before, but no, I wouldn't have the basic understanding in order to inform that or have the confidence to participate in a meaningful way in these studies. And that gave rise then for our own question to reflect on as a research team is how can families inform VR design if they have no understanding of its basic capabilities? And we looked at how we could address this. So we developed a familiarization environment, so it was called VR Foundations, and the idea of this familiarization environment was that people living with dementia and their support persons could actually get a chance to trial the headset themselves to get an understanding of its basic functions, so how you can pick something up, how you can throw something in the environment, and generally what it feels like to be immersed in a virtual world. In the hope then that would inspire future design decisions and also allow for equal power sharing between myself and the families. So suddenly, by using this technology probe or this familiarization environment, we were on equal footing because we had something tangible that we could all discuss with each other. Reflection 3 then is that participation is subjective. And what I want to stress here is we've heard all week about the value of involving people living with dementia in research projects, and I fully agree with this, that full participation is the gold standard and what we should all be striving for. But as a PhD student in the middle of a COVID-19 pandemic, there are also several factors that influence having this full participation. Some of which are my own limitations or barriers, such as your time. As a PhD student, you're on strict time, you have funding requirements, but also for families themselves. They had, individual interest in the project, if they wanted to actually be involved at every stage of the research project, or also priorities and other commitments that they might have had aside from the research itself. So I think there's really very much a need to be flexible and realistic about the amount of participation that you can provide, and also to normalise participation at some stages and not others. So for family members, really giving them the opportunity to participate at each stage of the research process, but being flexible and enabling them to kind of jump in and out at different stages of the research as well. And the use of kind of multiple methods of formal and informal data collection. So initially we had decided that at each feedback iteration for the application that we would do an online meeting where we could discuss kind of what their feedback was and instantly get feedback for families, and these would be done on a monthly basis. And for me, that was kind of my gold standard during COVID. But families actually decided themselves that they would prefer for me to pre-record a video, email it out to them and give them the chance to actually review it at their own time and come back then with an email with their feedback. So very much being flexible and meeting families where they're at is really important. And then the final reflection is enriching research. So definitely having people living with dementia and their family members involved has certainly enriched my research process because they are experts by experience. And I know we heard Chris Roberts at his keynote speak at the start of this conference this week saying that people living with dementia are experts by experience in their own right, and I couldn't agree more. So this research, my research project, has really been strengthened by their expertise. And also as a PhD student, it can be quite a lonely process. You're really in this, you're solely focused on one project. And I think having them involved has really inspired me to keep the project momentum, and also having a desire to succeed and pay tribute to their time and their effort that they have put in over the past year. Again, this week we've heard so much about the theme of the conference as building bridges, and this is a bridge from my own hometown in the west of Ireland. So what I would like to just stress is the fact that PPI involvement can really be that bridge the knowledge gap that I had as an early career researcher, but also researchers in general. I know Louise touched on it there, the fact that what we bring to the table is our expertise in terms of what is out there in the research space. So obviously I have some expertise in terms of what virtual reality and dementia research looks like and what are the gaps. But what I'm missing is at the other side of this bridge is the expertise by experience. I do not know what it's like to live with dementia or to care for somebody with dementia. And this is where PPI comes in as this bridge, bridging the knowledge gap between the empirical and the expertise by experience. And I think it's really important to note that this is very much a reciprocal relationship. So it's not just me crossing over to gain knowledge from the families, but also they were gaining quite a lot from trialing the technology, getting a sense of what it's like to design VR and the different components, learning about avatars, learning about different elements that go into virtual reality design. And these are just some quotes from one of my fantastic PPI contributors, but it just shows the idea of this reciprocal relationship and the respect and inclusiveness that we all felt during this process as well. And just to leave on this note, I suppose, with having PPI members involved and having families involved in this process very much was the compass guiding my own PhD journey. As I mentioned, it is a very kind of lonely road sometimes, so it's quite heartening to know that you always have those families there as a sounding board for the decisions that you make. And I'll just leave a quick quote by Isaac Walton. Good company on a journey makes the way seem shorter, and I think that perfectly reflects my journey with the families and with the PPI group for my own project. So I'd just like to thank you for your attention. I've left my email and my Twitter. If you do want to reach out with any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashley. And as explained at the beginning, we are going to have now, quite lucky, we have 15 minutes for questions and answers. And before opening the discussion, I just wanted to say there's a few comments already in the app saying, wow, what an impressive research. And I think I wanted to also add my acknowledgement to that, because I think it's so impressive and so good to see as much research going on, not just with research, but having involved people with dementia from the beginning to the end. And I think that's something new that's happening now around Europe, and it's really, really a pleasure to be chairing this session in this topic. So I have a number of questions in the app, and then if there's time, we can also open any comments from the people here in Bucharest, but also you can put your questions in the app if you prefer. And there's a number of questions about technology, because I know many of the speakers were touching on different points of technology. And so for either of the two of you, there is somebody saying, I think that elderly people living with dementia are afraid of learning new things, especially technology. Do you agree? So either of the three of you, and we need to share the microphones, or do we have a microphone they can use, perhaps?
Yeah, I think this is working. I do. I definitely agree with that. But I think for my own project, that was something that what I touched on there, having that familiarization environment or a kind of a graded introduction to the technology is really important, and something that's not going to deter them from their participation. I think it's really important as well, my background in occupational therapy, but we speak about like a just right challenge. So making sure that the technology you introduce is something that has, you know, just the right amount of challenge for that person to kind of stem their interest, but also something that's not a deterrent. So it's kind of a fine line between trying to manage that as well. But I think, you know, by having people involved in that process and building that rapport is really important before you actually introduce the technology itself. I don't know if anyone else wants to add.
The one other thing I would just say that we found very useful is if you start with something that is of interest to the person. So if we ever, for example, have anything that we're running through a tablet, then starting with just looking at family photos or, funnily enough, Google Maps and being able to see your own house is something that everybody likes. But starting with ordinary kind of everyday uses and then building up, as Aisling said.
And I can add from our experience that also sharing with the group of other people, it helps overcoming afraid of or frightening in new things, in learning new things.
Thank you so much for addressing that question. I have another question as well in technology. I think it was for you because it was during your session, but it can be, I think, for either. And it's how people living with dementia feel about the use of voice assistants.
Well, they experimented the use of voice assistant in both the groups, and for some users, from some participants, these voice assistants were already installed at their home, so for them it was something that they could learn more, but they still could use at home. For others, it was a whole new thing, but they were all surprised about what it can be achieved with voice assistant, also because it kind of reduce the interface issues, as you can interface with it in the most simple way, or let's say such as the voice and how you normally interact also with other people. So in that case, it's just the matter of kind of learn some sort of keywords and some sort of procedure on how to best use the voice assistant. But it was it suscitate a high interest in people.
Any other comments from the voice?
I will just add a little bit to that. We've started looking at this in a bit more detail because voice assistants are they're everywhere, you know, and I think it's something that as the technology to be able to make the voices sound more human, as that is progressing, the likelihood of using voice assistants at home, whether it's just one you buy, you know, off the shelf in an electronic store, or whether it's part of an intervention, I think they are going to increase. But my view at the moment is we don't actually know enough about this. I've seen very small scale studies that have conflicting evidence. Some people like them, some people don't. There can be a challenge with a sort of a disembodied voice suddenly coming out of nowhere. But I've seen some instances where there's some really good results as well, and then there's a discussion as to whether it should be a voice you know or a voice you don't know, and again the jury's out on that. Some people like it to be a family member, some people really don't. So I actually think there's more research needed in this space. I think all of the studies that are out there at the moment are very small scale, or they incorporate a voice assistant with a lot of other different technologies. There's room, if anybody would like to do it, for a study that just looks at voice assistants alone and really tries to flesh out what's working and what's not.
Thank you, Louise. And I think we're very pleased to have two people doing their PhD. There's a question in particular around that. And thank you, it was for Ashlyn. Thank you for sharing your challenges as an ESR for recruitment. Any tips for other people doing for the ESRs, PhDs, with regard to recruitment specifically?
Yeah, I think from an Irish context, definitely using, and I know they're widespread in Europe as well, but the research databases are really great, or research registrars, because you have already got a pool of people who are interested in research, so it's generally a little easier. That being said, it is quite hard in Ireland to recruit. It is still a challenge, but definitely I think knowing what services are out there and really being aware of that and networking within those organisations to establish a gatekeeper there is really important, but also just to persevere and be resilient is really important as well. And what I would say is to give yourself enough time to recruit. Oftentimes you can kind of underestimate that as a PhD student in your Gantt chart, so giving yourself probably more time than you think you need for the recruitment process as well is really important.
Giovanni, do you have any tips as well as a PhD student?
Yeah, I didn't actively participate in the recruitment of participants because it was directed by the local services in Italy. So I do not have any tips on that.
Excellent. Thank you. There's one for you specifically, Louise. And are there already user experiences on the website, and which are the use prefer? Which are the user the more prefer if it is already available?
There are a couple of user stories already on the website. So we've had a couple of sessions where we have trained trainers. So they are in each of the countries. So in Italy, in the Netherlands, Germany and Ireland. And they have now gone out to their own practices, and they are trying out a number of the different scenarios, and they're implementing them. So over the coming weeks, you'll see more of those user stories go up. But from the feedback from the sort of train the trainer training, the tools that simulate very busy environments. So the sort of combination of the whether it's through headphones or through a sort of a loudspeaker, different types of noise, that sort of background noise, that was important. Also, there's a scenario that looks specifically at personal care, and it's one where the person with dementia is very happily, sitting engaged in their own activity, and somebody just comes straight in and takes their shoes and socks off because they want to wash their feet without any sort of thought about the time of day. This is why we're doing it, and that's been a very, very popular scenario so far. And then the few around communication and meal times. The meal times have been quite popular. So I would say it's still in the sort of early stages. There are about, I would say, 5 or 6 user stories that I think will be quite useful to somebody who is just thinking about how could I use this, and there's some videos that show some of the different pieces in action. And then our hope is, as people engage with them, they will also send us more examples of how they've used the toolkit.
I have one for all the speakers, and I was particularly thinking about you, Ruth, because you presented quite well them. So the question is, do you have any more concrete examples of how people with dementia being involved, the community being involved, has changed the research methodology or has impacted the research results? And I don't know whether each of you might like to have your own views about that.
Yeah, I can certainly start. So one of the things for us, it was really looking about the trial design and how that could fit in with people's daily lives. So in reality, is the schedule even practical, and what our aims and objectives, can they be adapted? Can they be flexible? So, what happens if the participant just doesn't want to attend clinic that day? They're not, and people living with Alzheimer's their daily lives can be really unpredictable. So, and what tools we could help support with that, so just simple things like there's a single point of contact at site, getting to know those individuals. So, if a support partner needs to phone the site, they can say, have the nurse that they've met before available to speak to that individual, and even simple things like, oh, we've got your favourite cheese sandwiches waiting for you today, and just, and also giving something as simple as like a picture of the nurse to say, do you remember Mary? She's going to be there waiting for you. She's on the phone now, ready to talk to you. So just having those personal connections and being able to offer flexibility that, if today doesn't work, don't worry, you can come tomorrow. Would that be any better? We can reschedule, and also having just knowing the infrastructure at a site and how that might need to be adapted. So, if an overnight stay is needed, can the support partner stay with them? Is there that capability? And then that gives us the ability to look for those particular sites that have those facilities, so that we can ensure that the environment is most suitable for participants. So those are some of the things that we really heard and really tried to embrace.
So any other reflections on what's been the impact or the main outcomes of having people with dementia involved that way?
I think I kind of touched on it in my own presentation, but really just strengthening the design, like the final prototype that you have. And I know oftentimes we have, you read something in research and you think, yeah, that's going to definitely work and we can translate that into the application. But actually, until you involve people with lived experience, you realise that actually, although it's in research and says it will work, sometimes it's not the best option. So I think definitely, I'll just give an example. We had different kind of avatars, or initially we had a controller that had 2 main buttons, and we thought, okay, the research says this has worked before, but until we actually tried it with families, they said, no, I think we actually just need 1 main controller and keep it as simple as we can. So I think that's really important and definitely works to strengthen the final technology prototype that you have. So yeah, hopefully that answers that question.
I suppose I came across something that sort of added to that I wasn't really expecting, and that was at the beginning when we first started looking at involving people with dementia more comprehensively in the research. There was a lot of resistance. Would they be able to, what happens if they're not well and somebody drops out? And I think we've really demonstrated quite often to our other research partners, particularly those in the health service, that actually this is something that we really can do. But I think we still have a little bit of a challenge. So I think we've cracked the involving people with, say, milder or earlier stage of dementia in our research. But I still get a lot of pushback if I say, well, I think we can involve people with more advanced stages of dementia. So I think we still have a little bit of a way to go. And I think that is a challenge, that we get diverse voices as part of that experience. Otherwise you end up potentially with research that more focuses on the earlier part of the journey, and we're still reliant on the family or the carer or the supporters to give us the rest of the story. But I think there are ways to do that, and I think it's good to push back a little bit and say, well, let's try,
There was a question connected to that, and that's going to be the last question because for the time. And it's how can we learn a lot from the PI that we are doing, and how could we extend that to the use, to the implementation of technology in daily life? So how can we extend all this learning to that technology that we are using daily life, not just when around projects, but beyond that?
I think one of the ways that we can do that is by normalizing it a little bit more. So bringing, we have, and I think the smartphone is a really good example. And the idea of having just a simpler way of using the smartphone, or even, enabling people to understand that there are settings that will make it more easier to use. But it's bringing that education out to the general public. So it's how we disseminate our research findings. It's how we get them out into mainstream conversations, and the other thing is making sure that in doing so that they don't cost a fortune, because I always say that when you put dementia before something, the price goes up. It's a bit like wedding. flowers, you know. So it's trying to do it in a way that's not too expensive and getting the message out there.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the fact that we created this guide is meant to work, in fact, sharing and promoting the use of technology, the low-cost one, even though a smartphone is not the proper definition of low-cost in some cases, but it's a very common technology that is used every day. It doesn't require any further programmation, and because everything is already there for what are the basic needs. And so therefore, finding ways of easing up and facilitate the use of that technology can make people more close to the piece of technology.
Thanks a lot, everyone. I have this just last question because it's there and it's very short, I hope. What's in the virtual reality? What's inside? And they're joking, it's not a shooting game, they hope. But just very quick, please.
So actually the activities have been selected by the families themselves, so they're in different themes. So there's a nature theme where you can go into a polytunnel and water and grow plants. There's a music hall where you have a jukebox and you can select different music. Again, the playlists have been selected by the families themselves. I'm trying to think off the top of my head, but there's travel where you can visit different places in the world. And then there's a circus tent because families wanted that element of shared fun. So throwing a ball at cans and knocking them down, and there's a simple card matching game that can be graded level of difficulty based on the person's needs themselves. So I hope that, yeah.
Thanks a lot. Thanks so much. It's 12 o'clock, so I'm going to close the session. Before thanking to our fantastic speakers, I just have two reminders for you. One is to please remember to vote the posters, and you can do that in two ways. In the Constanza room, you can vote for the in-person posters, but also you can vote for the online posters, and you have to do that for today. And to do that, you can use the QR code for voting. So that's my first message. And the second one, Gladys is asking me to remind people who are leaving today the hotel to please check out in the hotel before lunch, before 12, because apparently there's a number of guests who haven't been able to check out yet. So these are the two messages before lunch. I really want to thank our speakers. I think it's been a really fantastic session. I will have to stay here for another hour or two the whole afternoon. It's my favorite topic, public involvement and technology. So it's been really, really interesting with a lot of, I think, very important messages for everyone out there wanting to as well start doing public involvement or who are doing public involvement. And also our audience for a lot of questions. I think we were very pleased to have so much interaction in the app. So thank you very much, everyone. And I wish you that you have a nice afternoon in the conference. Thank you.